The first time I heard her voice up close, it was like a rhythm I hadn't known I'd been missing. She leaned toward me in the dimly lit room, and her words slid across the space between us, soft and almost teasing. "Do you hear my heart beating?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure I did. Not in the literal sense, at least. But somehow, I felt it. The subtle tremor beneath her chest, the warmth in the crook of her neck, the way her presence seemed to pull the air around me taut. "Only because it matches mine," I whispered back, and for a brief moment, the world narrowed to her amber eyes and the faint scent of her perfume, a mix of something floral, something dangerously familiar. She was unlike anyone I had ever met. Graceful, poised, but not without the hints of vulnerability that made her feel real, tangible, alive. The slight hesitation when she touched her own necklace, the way her fingers lingered too long on the rim of her glass, small, almost imperceptible gestures that made me watch her more closely than I should. I could feel the pull, the quiet gravity of her attention settling on me, and I didn't resist. I was younger than her by decades, but the difference felt irrelevant here, suspended in the charged stillness between us. I noticed everything. The way her hand brushed against mine when she reached for the same book, the soft tremble in her laugh, the way her eyes flicked to mine, holding something unspoken. There was a tension there that was more than curiosity, something like longing, like recognition. The room was quiet, but it hummed with energy. The soft creak of the floorboards under her heels seemed louder than it should have been. The faint scent of coffee lingered in the air, mingling with the subtle perfume clinging to her skin. My pulse quickened without permission, my hands unwilling to stay still as I tried not to betray how acutely aware I was of her proximity. She tilted her head slightly, letting her hair fall forward in a curtain that brushed her collarbone, and I wanted, for a fleeting, terrifying second, to reach out and tuck it back behind her ear. But I didn't. Instead, I let the silence stretch, letting it speak the things our voices couldn't. Every glance, every slight shift in posture, was a sentence in a conversation that neither of us had the courage to say aloud. Her gaze softened, and the tiniest curve of a smile tugged at her lips. I felt the heat of it, the invitation in the way she lingered near, and my chest tightened. The world outside that little room had ceased to exist, leaving only the unspoken, delicious tension that had us both caught in the same quiet orbit. And then, just as the moment felt unbearably fragile, the sound of a door opening echoed down the hallway. A sharp, intrusive click that sliced through the space we had been creating, leaving us both frozen, half smiling, half breathless. Her eyes met mine again, wide, surprised, a flicker of something unreadable passing between us. The spell was broken, but only for a moment. The afternoon had settled into quiet murmurs and shifting shadows when I realized how easily I had slipped into noticing her, really noticing her, in ways that felt almost forbidden. The sunlight caught her hair just so, turning the dark strands into a subtle halo, and I felt my chest tighten without warning. She laughed softly at something I said, a sound that seemed too intimate for a casual encounter, and I found myself leaning closer, drawn by it in spite of my better judgment. She had a way of moving that was deceptively effortless, but I caught the small imperfections, the slight hesitation in her step, the way her hand trembled when she reached for her coffee cup, the faint crease in her brow when she thought I wasn't looking. There was history written in those little gestures, a lifetime of experiences she didn't share easily. I could sense the edges of old disappointments, the remnants of someone who had loved deeply and lost. And somehow, I wanted to trace them, to touch them gently, even if it scared me. She, too, noticed me in ways I wasn't ready to admit aloud. I felt it in the way she lingered near, just long enough to brush against my arm, in the subtle shift of her body when our conversation lulled into silence. There was risk here, more than just social expectation or the curious glance of others if they ever noticed us together. She carried a life, a reputation, a quiet dignity, and I was nothing but a young man orbiting too close to her gravity. And yet, every moment seemed to pull us closer, as if the world outside had no right to interfere. I caught the faintest scent of her perfume when she leaned over to read a page in the same book, a warmth brushing my sleeve, and I had to remind myself to breathe. The tension hummed through the air, quiet, insistent, unavoidable. It wasn't just desire. It was recognition, a feeling that neither of us wanted to name but couldn't deny. She spoke softly, and I noticed the way her breath grazed my cheek. Her words were casual, but the intimacy behind them pressed against me, unrelenting. I wanted to reach out, to let my fingers trace the line of her arm, to close the invisible distance that seemed to crackle with electricity. Yet every time I moved slightly, she would step back, as though testing the boundaries, teasing, deliberate, fragile. For a moment, time stilled. Her hand brushed mine as she adjusted a folded corner of paper, and I didn't pull away. It lingered, a fleeting connection, almost nothing, yet everything. Our eyes locked, and there it was, a shared acknowledgement of something neither of us could say aloud. The quiet, invisible tether that had been pulling us closer snapped into sharper focus. And in that suspended heartbeat, I understood. We were both afraid, both drawn, both daring ourselves to feel something that might be impossible, but we weren't turning away. Not yet. The soft click of the front door made my pulse leap, and I stiffened as if the sound had been a gunshot. She froze beside me, her hand still resting lightly on the edge of the table, fingers brushing mine almost by accident, or maybe on purpose. My stomach twisted, a mixture of anticipation and dread. Was that someone? I whispered, though my voice was too low even for her to catch fully. She shook her head subtly, eyes flicking toward the hall, then back to me. That glance, a mix of reassurance and challenge, made my chest ache. The air between us seemed to thicken, each second stretching long enough for me to feel her warmth in every nerve ending. I wanted to lean in, just slightly, to close the invisible gap, but hesitation anchored me. The risk wasn't just the interruption. It was everything else. The age difference, the unspoken rules of her life, the quiet judgment of a world that wouldn't understand why a young man like me felt drawn to someone like her. And yet, the pull was irresistible. I noticed the soft rise of her chest with each breath, the way her hair brushed her shoulder and nearly tickled my arm, the faint tilt of her lips as if she were about to speak something intimate and dangerous. We moved closer without moving, a slow dance of proximity and restraint. My hand itched to reach for hers, to feel the certainty of touch, but she subtly shifted, maintaining the line between temptation and propriety. Our eyes met in the faint sunlight spilling across the room, lingering longer than comfort allowed. Her gaze said everything I couldn't: curiosity, desire, fear, longing, and I swallowed hard, trying to steady the racing of my heart. Then, almost as if the world itself was conspiring, a phone buzzed on the table. I jumped, and she exhaled softly, a laugh caught in her throat. The interruption was minor, but it felt catastrophic, a reminder of how fragile our closeness was. And yet, when our hands brushed again as I reached to silence the phone, it wasn't a fleeting contact. This time, our fingers lingered, the subtle pressure of skin against skin sending electricity shooting straight through me. We paused, breath uneven, and the space between us was no longer empty. It was charged. I could feel her pulse against my chest as I leaned in, almost close enough to bridge the distance. Her eyelashes dipped, her lips parted slightly, and I froze, suspended in the tension of possibility. One heartbeat, one microsecond, and it could have happened. But the world intruded again. The soft cough of someone approaching from the hall, the faint hum of life beyond our room. We pulled back slightly, though not entirely, our bodies still magnetically aligned. Her shoulder brushed mine, subtle but deliberate, and my heart refused to calm. In that tiny, stolen moment, the barrier between us cracked, a secret shared, a temptation felt, a promise unspoken. Neither of us moved away fully, not yet. And as we lingered there, so close that I could feel her warmth seeping into me, I realized something terrifying and exhilarating. We were both resisting, and yet, in the act of resisting, we were closer than ever. The evening air was heavy, the room dim, and every shadow seemed to press closer, as if conspiring to heighten what neither of us could name. I could feel her heartbeat through the space between us, rapid, uneven, and entirely hers, and somehow, impossibly, it mirrored mine. My hands twitched with a desire I had tried to deny, an ache that had been building since the first glance. She leaned against the counter, absent-mindedly tracing a finger along the edge, and I stepped closer, drawn by the gravity of her presence. I wanted to brush the stray hair from her face, to see her fully, to feel the warmth of her cheek against my palm. My voice dropped low, rougher than I intended, as I murmured, "I can't stop thinking about you." Her eyes flicked to mine, wide, unguarded, vulnerable. And then, she confessed in a whisper that made my chest tighten. "I know. I shouldn't, but I do." The words hung between us like smoke, twisting and curling around everything we'd been trying to hold back. She shifted, leaning slightly against me, the faint pressure of her body enough to make my knees weaken. The scent of her perfume, warm and intoxicating, curled into my senses, making it impossible to think clearly. I could hear the subtle hitch in her breath, feel the quickening thrum of her pulse under my fingertips. And yet, fear clawed at the edges of desire. What would this mean? How reckless, how improper, and yet, how impossible to resist. My fingers brushed hers again, lightly, then lingered, and I caught the faintest shiver that ran through her, subtle, but enough to ignite something deeper inside me. I shouldn't," she whispered, but her body betrayed her words, leaning closer still, a breath away. I could feel the warmth of her cheek against my shoulder, the soft curve of her neck exposed, the tantalizing pause between want and restraint. Every nerve in my body screamed to close the gap, to touch, to taste, to bridge the unspoken chasm that had stretched between us for so long. Her gaze dropped, lips parting just slightly, and my heart slammed against my ribs. I wanted to speak, to say something, anything that could justify the leap I was about to take, but words failed me. So I let silence do the work, heavy and electric, and let my hand hover near her face, trembling with the awareness of how fragile, how incendiary this moment was. And then, just as the tension became unbearable, as if the universe itself held its breath, she tilted her head slightly, eyes locking onto mine with a mix of daring and fear. Her lips were so close now, impossibly close, that I could feel her breath against mine. And in that suspended heartbeat, nothing existed but the pull between us. Nothing except the question hanging in the air, louder than any sound. Would we cross the line, or retreat and leave everything unresolved? I hadn't realized how much I had counted on the quiet, stolen moments with her, until the truth dropped like a stone between us. She hesitated at the doorway, eyes wide, and I knew immediately something had shifted. Someone saw us," she whispered, her voice fragile, yet taut with restrained emotion. My chest tightened as if the air itself had constricted. I didn't mean for them to know. I thought I could hide it. Her fingers trembled slightly as they brushed against the frame of the door, the faintest quiver that made my stomach clench. I wanted to reach out, to reassure her, but instinct held me back. The moment was delicate, charged, and now more dangerous than ever. I stepped closer, careful not to invade her space too abruptly, but every motion carried weight. The brush of her sleeve against my arm sent a shock straight through me. Her eyes flicked up at me, searching, questioning, vulnerable, yet daring me to respond. I could feel my heartbeat hammering, in tandem with hers, and it was as if the room itself had shrunk, leaving only the taut space between us. "You knew," she murmured, almost accusing, almost pleading. Her body leaned slightly forward, only to pull back again at the slightest internal hesitation. The tension made the air thick, warm, almost suffocating. I wanted to close the distance, to press her against me, to let her know that this, whatever this was worth the risk. But the danger of discovery lingered, prickling the edges of desire. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. I didn't think it mattered. But even as I spoke, my hand itched toward her shoulder, the subtle urge to touch, to reassure, to claim the intimacy we had stolen from the world. She shivered at my words, or maybe at the energy I didn't mask, and the slightest tremor ran along her spine as she exhaled softly. Her gaze dropped, and I noticed the quick inhale she didn't quite hide, the way her fingers brushed mine as she adjusted her stance. My body responded before my mind could, moving just a fraction closer, drawn by an invisible thread of urgency and longing. Each heartbeat was a warning, each breath a temptation. And then she did something I hadn't expected. She reached out, lightly, almost daring me to meet her halfway. Our fingers touched, lingered, the electricity between us undeniable. It was more than proximity. It was confession without words, a a surrender that neither of us could fully articulate. The risk had doubled, the stakes had shifted, and yet, in that brief, trembling connection, everything we had been denying became impossible to ignore. I felt her lean ever so slightly toward me, close enough for our breaths to mingle, for the warmth of her body to imprint against mine. And in that suspended heartbeat, I realized the choice had been made before we even spoke it aloud. We couldn't turn back. The pull toward each other was unstoppable, and the world, whoever else knew, would have to wait. The room was quiet except for the low hum of the evening, the soft tick of the clock, the faint rustle of curtains in the warm breeze. I could feel her presence before I even saw her fully, the subtle scent of her perfume, the way the air seemed to bend around her. She was just inches away now, her shoulder brushing mine, her breath mingling with mine, the tension between us a living, pulsing thing. I wanted to speak, to break the silence, but my voice caught. Instead, I let my gaze linger on the curve of her lips, the faint tremor of her hand hovering near mine. Her eyes searched mine, wide, vulnerable, and fierce all at once, as if she were asking a question I already knew the answer to but feared to admit aloud. I started, then stopped, the words useless. Desire and fear tangled inside me, inseparable. I could feel her shifting toward me, the heat of her body brushing against mine in a tentative, almost imperceptible way. My hand twitched, desperate to find hers, to hold her, to anchor this impossible moment. She leaned slightly closer, just enough for the warmth of her cheek to graze my arm. The tension became unbearable, electric, and the room seemed to shrink around us. Every heartbeat echoed in my ears. Every breath she drew pressed against me like an unspoken plea. She tilted her head, searching my eyes, and I realized the choice was ours alone. Step back and retreat into the safety of what we should, or surrender to what we couldn't deny. Her lips parted slightly, a whisper suspended between us. "I don't want to step away," she admitted, voice low, trembling, honest. The confession sent a jolt straight through me. My fingers brushed hers, then entwined, holding tightly as if letting go would undo everything we had built in stolen moments and silences. The world outside, the rules, the expectations, they all faded. There was only this, the warmth of her hand in mine, the tilt of her body against mine, the quiet recognition that what we felt was real, flawed, human, and impossible to ignore. I leaned closer, careful, reverent, feeling her pulse thrum against my chest, and she met me halfway. We didn't need words. Every glance, every subtle movement, every shared breath spoke volumes. Desire and fear, longing and hesitation, all intertwined, messy and beautiful. The boundary between us dissolved, not perfectly, not safely, but wholly, and in that surrender, we understood each other fully for the first time. For a long, suspended moment, we stayed like that, connected, trembling, aware of every inch, every beat, every unspoken confession. And though nothing had been made public, though the world remained unchanged, we had crossed our own threshold. We had chosen each other. And in that choice, clarity emerged. The risk was real, the attraction undeniable, and the bond we had built, fragile, dangerous, and intoxicating, was ours to navigate together. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains, painting the room in warm, gentle tones. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, the tension between us had eased, replaced by something quieter, steadier, a fragile, radiant peace. We sat together on the edge of the sofa, shoulders brushing, hands intertwined as if we had always belonged in this small, imperfect rhythm. She let out a soft sigh, resting her head lightly against my shoulder. The warmth of her body, the faint scent of her perfume, the easy weight of her presence, it all felt impossibly right. The age gap, the warnings of the world, the whispered doubts that had haunted us, they no longer mattered. Here, in this room, in this moment, we were simply two people who had found each other and decided it was worth the risk. I traced my thumb across her knuckles, watching her fingers relax against mine. She lifted her gaze, eyes soft, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "I never thought I'd feel this," she murmured. Her voice was quiet, intimate, carrying the gravity of someone who had carried regret for too long and finally allowed herself to be seen. You don't have to think about it anymore. I replied softly, my forehead brushing against hers, a contact gentle but grounding. We stayed like that, eyes closed, breaths mingling, sharing a silence that spoke louder than any words could. Every tremor, every pulse, every unspoken promise, it was ours, and it was enough. The world outside could wait. For once, the past didn't tug at her, the future didn't demand fear, and I didn't have to measure myself against expectations. We simply existed together, the messy, human, beautiful reality of our connection filling the room. A faint laugh escaped her as she tilted her head slightly, catching my gaze. It feels simple, doesn't it? I smiled, squeezing her hand lightly. It does. And maybe that's the most complicated part, that it feels natural, even though it's everything we weren't supposed to have. She leaned in closer, resting her cheek against mine. I could feel her pulse, steady now, and the warmth of her breath against my neck. In that quiet closeness, we had found the resolution we'd been searching for: acceptance, intimacy, and the thrilling, terrifying freedom of being together without pretense. For a long time, we just stayed like that, two bodies aligned, hearts beating in subtle harmony. The world outside continued on, but in this moment, nothing else existed. We had crossed the boundaries, faced the risks, and finally allowed ourselves to fully connect, messy, human, and real. And in that lingering warmth, I realized that this was only the beginning, the start of a story we would write together, one heartbeat at a time. Speech balloon engagement questions for YouTube. Did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next?